Well, I was trying to think what led me to my interest at this conference in social awareness and bringing it into the classroom. And I'll ask Janelle, who's behind the camera, where the quote came from. If we can replace a teacher with a computer, we should.
It's Arthur Clarke.
Okay.
Arthur Clarke.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting quote. Yeah.
We should, because. Yeah, but this it's not. It doesn't. The idea in the 21st century, like my parents went to school because that's where the information was. The teacher and the books of the school had the information. You can get the information anywhere now. So what can which is the point? What does a teacher, it actually is a very positive statement for teachers. We just need to bring something into the classroom that computers can't bring. And I think it's motivation, it's social awareness, it's teaching values. I mean, not in the sense of my values, but. And so I went to, my favorite session was about this, was 6 different presentations that had to do with social awareness in the classroom, and they were very varied. One was a woman in South Africa teaching poetry to her students. Another was done in the form of, they read their emails back and forth to each other. A principal of a public school who was trying to allow autistic children to participate in ESL classes, and with someone helping him, a professor at a university. So one was just research on this. But when I came back, I thought, how can I incorporate this in my classes? And in my writing class, we did some current events and talked about some things, but Svetla mentioned this Holocaust exhibit at the Union. And it was black and white photos, portraits of people, survivors. Many of them actually from the Kansas City area. And I love black and white photos, but I didn't realize that my students weren't that excited. So I gave the assignment, they do journal writing, and they have to write several times outside of the class. And they have to do an in-class journal writing once a week. And I correct for content in this case. So I said, you all need to go see this, and then you will write. I will give you some specific questions on Monday, and you will write about this. Well, some of them went early, and by Friday we're saying things like, this is a really boring show. I went past it, and it's just these black and white photos, and I thought, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. And I thought, no, well, maybe I made a mistake, but I'll go with it. The student who was very negative about it was German, and I thought maybe he's sensitive. So I made a big point of discussing how racism is discrimination is everywhere. I told my story about Rosa Parks being my hero, and my dad, who was a wonderful father, a great man, but grew up in the South and had some prejudice. And that when I was going off one morning to middle school, my parents, who never argued, my mother had the newspaper and she was waving at my father, and there was Rosa Parks, and she said, why should she move to the back of the bus? And I'll never forget that. Well, so I think that helped a little bit. But I thought, well, I'll see what happens. So when it came time to write the next Monday, I gave them some specific questions. I said, be honest. If you want to talk about how boring this exhibit was, talk about it. If you want to talk about it, write about it for 5 minutes, and you can't. I think, almost without exception, every student, including the German one, wrote the whole time on the exhibit, and in a positive way. It was very interesting. And I'm going to read one in a minute. So then they had to do some bibliography and research work, and normally what I'd been thinking about was to write on a person of interest. But I changed it, thinking about my Rosa Parks story. I changed it to pick a person, living or dead, in any culture who you think affected social justice by one act they did, like Rosa Parks, or the German student did Muhammad Ali. And although they had to do, it wasn't a true research paper, because I said I want to see in the paper why you believe this person. And then they did some group work in which they talked about the person. They wrote very good papers. And I think the social justice is a motivator, well, not social justice, but Janelle and I talked about this too, that sometimes if you have something, heavier in a certain way to attach your communication to it. You're more motivated.
Yeah.
So if it's not such a light, it doesn't have to be a negative or a depressing subject, but something that you can grab onto. And I wanted to read, I asked the student if I could read it. And she is one of the better students. No grammar has been corrected, but this was her journal entry that day. Described the show in general. Last Thursday, I went to the art gallery of Student Union. Before reaching there, I thought there would be a huge space for the show, but I was wrong. To my surprise, the art gallery covered a small area and there were only black and white photos on display. So I thought it boring and started to watch a photo in its description. Then I found I was wrong again. The people in the photos were not just normal people, but Jewish people once put in the camp during World War II. I was shocked by each story. They had suffered from the days when some strangers might knock on your door at midnight, then forced you to separate from your families, or maybe to the death. However, they all survived. Some of them got married and had children, and I love this line, who led them to love again. Some chose not having children since they didn't want them to suffer another possible disaster. No matter how different the decisions they had made, they all had one similarity. They feel that the horrible memories in the camp just happened yesterday. They won't and they can't forget in the rest of their lives.
Well, that exhibit is great for reading. I mean, because if you look at how much there was to read, I couldn't make it through the whole thing.
And I was surprised some of them went through and
Yeah.
read quite a few, I think.
That's amazing. That's a great assignment.
So, yeah, and it all kind of came from the initial idea of, because when Svetla said this, oh, social justice, and then it evolved. Yeah. Which, one more point, because I think of the German student and a few others who were reluctant, is that one of the things that came out in a reader's workshop, I believe, that I think it was in that one, was that sometimes, just because students are hesitant to talk about a topic, doesn't mean they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. It's we had the same class, actually, and I had them
Yes.
for reading.
Yes.
And I don't know if
Great class.
this was at the same, if this was at the same time in the semester or not, but our last chapter in the textbook, and they chose the chapters that they were most interested in, so this was one that a lot of students had indicated interest in, and the chapter was on conflict and reconciliation. And my experience was a little different, and I don't know if it was too heavy, or I just we didn't have enough time, or I wasn't skilled enough at it, but the readings were pretty heavy. One was about, I don't know where, conflict in Thailand or Cambodia, and then there was a short reading from a Russian author about German prisoners of war, and I felt that student was very uncomfortable. The German student was very uncomfortable when they were reading that. And as I walked through the classroom as they were reading these, you know, I mean, there was a student from Afghanistan, Sri Lanka. I mean, and I was just thinking, wow, conflict is really touching their home environments. Even South Korea, you know, it's not far from them, and so maybe I wasn't quite sure how to handle it. I mean, we did the readings and it went fine, but there wasn't a lot of great discussion.
Might have been a touch maybe too close.
Yeah. So
I had a Libyan student, Syrian student, Japanese student, and all these issues came up. And in many cases, it was obvious that they really didn't want to. So we left those topics.
yeah. So
It's
I'm
a
glad
fine
that it worked
line.
really well.
Yeah,
for you
there's
guys.
a delicate balance there.
Because I mean, we didn't have any explosions or any problems,
right,
but
but still,
you have to be careful.
Part of it is in a language class, you don't want things to get so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That then,
Yeah, because the classroom just really felt very subdued. You know.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just that when something has touched you personally and it's a heavy subject, you may not be comfortable. You know, you have to be really comfortable to be able to discuss that.
So this may be, I didn't know whether it's my Rosa Parks example, but this may be why some of them took some, like one had a John Brown, Abraham Lincoln. They may have felt that was easier for them to distance.
Yeah. Right.
I can totally understand.
Although now that you mentioned that, we did do a reading from a booklet on civil rights, while I was at TESOL, actually, this was part of their homework that they read about the separate but equal, you know, so education and Kansas and that kind of stuff. And when I came back, we discussed some questions that they had written about that, and they were really interested in that. So,
I've
so
found a
that
very
distance,
positive
that
response,
distance
yeah.
may be key.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to look at these issues of injustice
Yeah.
in another culture. Well, it's always
Yeah.
easier than to
Yeah.
look at it in
Yeah.
yeah.
That's cool.
Well, the other thing I'd like to add is
Uh-huh.
that, you know, I think probably all of us just touched on a few things that we saw. And so if you'd like to talk to us, there's a lot more that we'd be happy
Yeah.
to share.
Oh,
Because,
yes,
I mean, poetry in the classroom I looked at,
Yeah.
the higher education and ESL, you know, there's all
Yeah,
sorts
exactly.
of issues there. The place of language programs in the university.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. Victoria and I went to a good session on blogging that I didn't bring up. It was really fun.
So,
And I went to a fun session on teaching an ITA course just for fun.
Mhm.
It was really good. So yeah, there was all kinds of stuff.
so there's lots more. This is just the tip of the
Yeah,
iceberg.
exactly. So we have a lot we'd like to share. And New Orleans was wonderful.
New Orleans, and we
We
had
had a good
a
time.
personal guide.
And it was
Actually,
fun. We had a good
Yeah,
time.
we did.
Yeah, we got to tour around the city and yeah.
Great
we
weather.
really, yes, we were very lucky. It was a really fun trip. We had a great time.
Thank you, Janelle, for filming this.
Yes, thank
Yes.
you, Janelle.